Like the number of casualties from military conflicts in the last decade is like less than how many men choose to take their own life in 1 year. But I think the diagnosis of the problem is beautifully put, right? And I think the best thing, I think chat was talking about this. Why do I feel like shit even though all of my necessities are met? And I also liked this sentence, almost everything that's enjoyable feels like it lacks substantial meaning. So the first thing is, I want to know, like, do you guys want me to read more stuff, or do you guys actually want to talk about things? I am kind of confused about, I feel like I should talk about this. But I need to know, okay. So the first thing is, do you guys know so in the last 7 years, do you guys know how much the suicide rate under the age of 18 has changed? Let's start there. It's a yes or no question. Well played. Yeah. So it's gone up by about 50% in 7 years. Right? And that's crazy. So the first thing is, I think if you guys are making observations about the world, do your best to find data. Okay? So I think it's fine to have theories, and the internet loves theories, right? Like people on Reddit are like always posting their opinions about shit. But ultimately I'm a scientist, so like I want data. So the first question is hero leukemia's premise correct? Are people suffering at a greater rate than they used to? And actually the answer is yes. So we have evidence. So mental health has now surpassed cancer and cardiovascular disease in the United States as the number one contributor of morbidity and mortality. Mental health now costs this nation more than cancer and heart attacks. So it's crazy, but the data actually supports exactly what hero leukemia is noticing, which is that like the primary problem we face today is not physical, it's mental. So as we look back, like let's say 50 years, 100 years, 200 years, 1,000 years, the main sources of stress or challenges that humans faced were not mental, they were physical. Like people had trouble finding enough food. People had trouble getting eaten by like lions and tigers. People had trouble like dealing with winters. And there are like these like famines and stuff from like the early 1900s and 1800s that like wiped out large swaths of people. Like there was a flu in the last 100 years, I forget which one it was, that wiped out like 15 to 30% of the population of Europe or something. Like 15% of the population died from the flu. The flu doesn't really kill anyone anymore. So the challenges that, was it Spanish flu? I don't remember. So the challenges that humanity is facing are changing. Like it's not infections that are killing us anymore. It's not even like, I mean, chronic illnesses are killing us, but we've gotten way better in terms of like cardiovascular disease. The leading cause of like problems in people's lives now is mental health. So the question is why? Why? And I think the answer in my mind is just, it's a little bit simplistic, and it's because we're not worrying about the other shit anymore because we don't die from it. Like I could get the flu, but like I don't stress about the flu, right? What I stress about now is meaning, fulfillment. And at the same time that we're sort of in the process of conquering physical illness, our brains are being assailed by technology. So I don't think we realized what we were doing when like, you know, people talk about the end of the world being like nuclear apocalypse. You guys know what I think is going to be the end of humanity? You know what I really think is going to be the end of humanity? Virtual reality girlfriends and boyfriends attached to sexual instruments with haptic feedback. Does anybody know what that means? Do you guys know what haptic feedback is? So like someone is going to develop a device. Like, so about 15 years ago, I was involved with, my dad was actually involved with a really interesting like cancer diagnosis device. So this was back when this is still going on, but I don't know if you guys know this, but the Middle East has a lot of American institutions that are opening up branches there, like especially hospitals. So like Cleveland Clinic and like Duke and things like that are all like opening up like medical like hospitals and stuff in the Middle East, like especially like in around the UAE. And so my dad was involved in the production of a device, which was a glove, which would allow him. So he puts on a glove in Houston, Texas at MD Anderson, and someone in Dubai is wearing a glove. And what happens is the person who's wearing the glove then palpates a breast, right? So like when you're doing cancer diagnosis for breast cancer, like the doctor feels the breast and you like feel for lumps. And then what my dad feels, so like the glove measures the resistance and then translates that feeling and then creates a sensation on my dad's hand. So he can like palpate a breast from like 1,000 miles away, right? So like the sexual stuff aside, like it's for clinical diagnosis, right? And so that technology is going to start getting used by virtual reality soon. So what's going to happen is we're going to like put on a haptic feedback suit. So I'm going to put on a pair of scrubs that has all these like pressure sensors. And what's going to happen is there's going to be like some sort of like genital device, right? Like something on the spectrum of like a dildo or vibrator or like fleshlight or something like that. And there's going to be virtual reality pornography that you're going to be able to feel. And then like somewhere along this doomsday scenario is going to be like an AI that's a girlfriend. So you're going to go on virtual dates with an AI that throws temper tantrums and then like sometimes doesn't put out. And then you'll be able to like have your sexual needs gratified. And then you're going to stop like procreating with regular humans and then the human race is going to die out. Like these are the pressures. Like this is not something that our brain was designed to deal with. It's scary. And on the other end of the spectrum, like that's like a doomsday apocalypse scenario. But on the other end of the spectrum is the like button. You guys know, like when Facebook blew up, it was because of the like button. Like Facebook was a thing that college kids used until the like button. And we're in a society where like there's all this kind of FOMO kind of stuff. Like people talk about this stuff, right? They talk about FOMO. And everyone was envious of other people, but like envy wasn't shoved in your face 8 hours a day. Like you didn't just, you didn't wake up, open up your bedroom window and see a beach with someone else like hanging out on the beach. And then you would put on your coat and walk into like the Massachusetts winter and then walk to your job and take the subway. Like we're bombarded with all of the amazing stuff that people are doing. And so this is kind of like a huge assault on our psychology because our brains are designed to compare. They're designed to compare. That's what they're made for. Like monkeys compare, humans compare. It's just what we do. And so technology is taking advantage of all of this stuff in our brain. The other basic problem is as our basic needs get met, like we think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like food and shelter and stuff are sort of getting taken care of. You have experiments with universal basic income in some parts of Scandinavia. And so previously in society, we needed people to produce stuff for society to function. Like, why do we as a society value jobs? Because jobs were necessary for the function of humanity. Like you needed to have a cooper to make a barrel, and you needed to have a blacksmith to do things, and you needed to have a farmer. But as technology produces, as like machines get better, as automation gets better, as lab-grown meat comes online, like what do we need people for? We don't need people for anything. It's like we don't need people for stuff. You can now grow in one story block, you can grow like 1,000 acres worth of lettuce on 1 square block, right? We have lab grown meat. So instead of like pastures and animals, like we can just grow that shit in a lab. And all the big like fast food producers are actually investing in this stuff. So I think it's going to be edible in the next 10, 15 years. And so human beings don't need to have like, you don't need to work for like food and shelter and stuff. Like in our lifetime, it's going to happen. So the more that our needs get met, the more we move up Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and then we get to this thing called self-actualization. And I think mental health is somewhere in that realm, right? Like that's the spectrum of mental health. Meaning, purpose. I'm a no one. And then not only are our needs getting met, but then we have like social media that's telling us that other people are like more important than we are. Right? And that's where you get this situation. This is why mental illness is higher than ever before. Because our survive, like our other needs are being met. So like the mind is what's left. The mind is where the major source of stress is. If you think about, our sympathetic nervous system, our fight or flight system was designed to help us against tigers and snakes. And now what does it do? What do we get stressed out about? Mortgages. Quarterly reports. Getting a promotion at the end of the year. Our sympathetic nervous system was not designed to be active for months at a time, which is what it is now. If you're a college senior with a liberal arts degree and a pile of debt, your sympathetic nervous system, your adrenaline system is going haywire for a year. It's not designed to do that. We were supposed to see a tiger and in the span of 15 minutes run away, kill it, or get eaten. That's what our nervous system was designed for. It's not designed for these protracted periods of stress. That's also why obesity is getting worse. Anyway, we can talk about obesity and the physiology of obesity. But stress literally makes you fat. It literally makes you fat. So when you have a high level of cortisol, what happens is cortisol mobilizes blood sugar. So it causes your body to break down fat and protein and glycogen and put put sugar in your blood. Because the purpose of cortisol was after you run away from a tiger, for the next 4 to 12 hours, the tiger may be sniffing your footprints and maybe showing up. So you need to have a lot of energy available. So your body would put a bunch of sugar into your blood so that you have easily available energy over the next 12 hours. And so what we used to do, if you see a tiger and you run away, you're going to hike for the next 8 miles to get away from the area that the tiger's in. That's what cortisol is designed for, is to provide you with energy so you can hike 8 miles. Now, when I'm worried about making mortgage at the end of the month, what do? I sit here in this chair. And so then my body gets confused. My body's like, we have a bunch of sugar in our blood. We must have just eaten a meal. Let's release some insulin. And then if we release some insulin, then what it's going to do is cause that sugar to be stored as fat. So literally what cortisol does is cause muscle breakdown to increase your blood sugar. And then your body, your pancreas is like, oh shit, we have a bunch of blood sugar because we don't burn it like we used to do. And then it's like, oh, we must have had a big meal, so let's release insulin. So then what happens is you get this. Okay? So, how am I going to do this real quick? You get this. This is called a buffalo hump. This is what happens when you have a cortisol tumor. This is literally what a cortisol tumor does to your body. Look at that. And this is the shit that we have done. This is what our stress does. We're stressed all the time. This is what's happening to you physiologically. Obesity rates in this country are 30%. Is that due to sugary beverages? Sure. It's also due to stress. Stress literally makes you fat. People talk about stress eating like it's a psychological problem. It's not a fucking psychological problem. It's a physiologic problem. And, look at this. This is what stress is doing to us. So, I think My Hero Leukemia is spot on. Right? That something is changing in our society. That we're killing ourselves at a higher rate than ever before. And you could talk about, gender dynamics a lot. I mean, I think that there's a lot of gender inequality. But I think it's shocking that... Let me just think about... Let me see if I can find the statistic. Men kill... So 80% of suicides in this country are men. Right? Why are men killing themselves? I think we have like something like 30 or 70,000 people a year kill themselves. 30 or 70,000 men a year. Which is an astronomical number. Like the number of casualties from military conflicts in the last decade is like less than how many men choose to take their own life in 1 year. Like that's staggering. So I do think that there's a lot of gender discrimination in this country and in the world. And I think that things are not equal between men and women. And I think that a lot of men are really struggling right now. And because of all this dialogue around gender discrimination, like men don't feel open about sharing. Like you can't, like the male victim is like, it's hard to be a male victim nowadays. Right? Because they're a privileged class. And I see this a lot because I work with like these men come to my office. And it's hard because they can't complain. And so I think that there's the pressures, I think My Hero Leukemia has it spot on. That why is it that most advanced countries in the world are also countries with the highest rates of suicide? It's because the most developed countries push us towards the top of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Right? So then mental illness is what becomes more problematic. Social media and technology definitely exacerbate that problem. Humans have always questioned the meaning of life, and it seems like we're getting further from the answer as time goes by. Absolutely. Because the meaning of life used to be like you didn't have the luxury of the meaning of life. Like my grandmother grew up with 11 people living in like a 10 by 10 room. Like literally. Like 11 people living in that room. And life expectancy in her day was like in the 50s. So the meaning of life was fucking surviving. That was the meaning of life back then. We conquered that. So now we have to find more ephemeral and diaphanous meanings of life. It's these subtle things. It's like dharma. Purpose, meaning. Like before it was just about getting by. Like all these boomers nowadays that are talking about like lack of purpose. Like because their job was just like they were just trying to get by. And now we're doing a pretty good job of getting by, so now our challenges are more mental. And I would be a little bit careful about assuming that people were happier before. Like, that's a really common bias. I don't really know if I have data to support that. Like, everyone says that, right? Like, life was simpler when we used to live in nature and things like that. I mean, infant mortality used to be something like 30%. I find it hard to believe that, like, 1,000 years ago, when infant mortality was 30%, like, people were happier. Like, I'm not sure.